Hi there and welcome to the RevOps show. Today we are tackling a question that everyone with a CRM wrestles with. How much freedom should I give users to make changes? What levels should people be able to mess with the CRM? Doug and Jess are going to get into who should be able to pull information from the system and what it takes to find the right balance between access and control. Let's break it down and jump into the episode.
Jess, birds are chirping, dogs are barking.
I wore my shirt in honor.
Pitchers are throwing, catchers are catching, hitters are hitting.
It's your favorite time of year.
New Year's is coming soon.
It is.
For those of you that don't know, New Year's is opening day in baseball. When is opening day in baseball?
I was gonna ask you that question, Doug. You're supposed to know the answer to that.
See, you keep me too busy. Oh, well, I hate that. Opening day is March 18th and 19th, but not really, because the Dodgers and somebody go play in Japan.
That doesn't make any sense.
Well, so they play games that matter, and then they don't play games that matter.
So they play in Japan. Are they allowed to do that?
Are they allowed to do that?
Are they allowed to play when it's not like officially like baseball season?
Well, it's officially baseball season on March 18th and 19th, and then they go back to spring training.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So officially starts because that's when they go to Japan to play. Is that okay? Okay, I see. But then they go back to spring. So everybody's not starting. It's not truly baseball season.
March 27th. My Nats open with a 3-game series against the Philadelphia Phillies. And Jess, the first 20,000 fans in attendance that afternoon will receive an opening day t-shirt.
Are you going to go?
Probably not.
You don't want a t-shirt?
Well, they pretty much only give one size, so.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And you have too much. You've booked me too much, Jess. You've got too much on my plate. What's up with that?
Got to keep you busy. Got to keep you on your toes.
You're screwing with my priorities.
Yep. Always. Baseball.
Check my new hat.
I do like your new hat. I did notice that you got a new hat. It's pretty cool.
Yep. It kind of shouts out, I think, to the Washington Senators, the old Block W for the Washington Senators. Although I worry that they're trying to get rid of the curly W. Jess, what are your thoughts on the curly W?
I don't have any thought. Believe it or not, I don't have any thoughts on the curly W.
I find this shocking. Jess, it feels like forever since we've RevOps and shown. We've used up our entire backlog.
Have we used up our entire backlog? I don't know that we have.
I'm pretty sure. Sure.
Well, it's been a long time. We've been busy.
It has been busy. And are you going to be able to take a break at least?
I hope so. I hope so. We'll know later today.
I had so many things queued up and planned.
I know.
And I can't.
I know.
I can't do it.
You can't do it. I'm having a little bit of disruption in my travel, but I think it's going to be okay. I'm choosing to stay optimistic.
That's somewhat out of character for you, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm stressed out. Don't get me wrong.
I mean, normally you're a little bit of a doomser, aren't you?
Yeah, usually.
I mean, if you feel like if you go into everything expecting it to be completely destroyed,
right,
then you can only be pleasantly surprised.
Precisely.
See, I understand how it works, Jess.
Yep.
I understand. So, Jess, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What do Goldilocks and CRM implementation have in common?
I don't know. What do they have in common, Doug?
The balance of their implementation just right.
Oh, that's what we're talking about today. Excellent podcasting from you. So today we're talking about...
I'm prepared.
Today we're talking about balancing lockdown of the CRM.
So what does lockdown mean to you?
Lockdown of maintaining accuracy of records. So what some would refer to as a clean database. Security, compliance. Those are the things that I think of when we talk about lockdown. of the CRM.
But what does lockdown mean?
Locked, like you don't get access to.
Like you can't fuck with it.
Yes, correct.
Not
exactly.
Fuck with it.
Not allowed to fuck with it. Exactly.
Oh, we forgot to mention 10,000 downloads, Jess.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you knew that.
Did I?
Yeah, Hannah told us. I think you even.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We crossed 10,000 downloads.
It's exciting. People really do like us.
I didn't know that Beverly had 10,000 friends.
Apparently she does.
She just downloaded 10,000 times.
Probably.
One of the. All right, sorry, back to this. So, what?
So lockdown means you can't fuck with it.
I'm sorry?
Lockdown means you can't fuck with it. I like that.
What levels should people be allowed to fuck with the CRM? I say they should be barely allowed to enter data.
That's what some of our clients would say. That's actually what prompted me to want to talk about this.
Oh, really? No, I'm really curious who that was. Jess, look, all we need is to log what's going on so that the right hand knows what the left hand's doing.
Yep, exactly.
Where would you like to start?
I want to start with how much restriction is too much. So what are some of the downsides to having too much restriction? Because like the question I get frequently is like, well, why can't we just not let them? Just don't let them enter companies. Don't let them edit companies. That'll keep the database clean.
The question where I would start is what's the job that you're really looking to do here? And what's the role of the data underneath it? So I mean, I can tell you that my opinion about this has changed over the years. I used to be very much about low restriction, and I've come to understand. I think that there's data of record and there's data of use, and so I think being able to balance that out is an important element. Like I do think that if you overly restrict CRM, then your adoption will be negatively impacted. And more than your adoption, your utilization will be negatively impacted. Because the more you restrict it, the more you prevent complete. Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you don't restrict it enough, your adoption will be negatively impacted and your utilization will be negatively impacted. And for a couple of reasons. One, we've talked about, people will screw things up and the data will get dirty and things will get manipulated that shouldn't be manipulated. But also, and what I want to make sure that we address here is constraints bring about focus, right? That's what process is all about. And so, business process must drive the technology. Technology should never dictate the business process, as we've talked about. Well, one of the ways that people try to prevent the technology from dictating the business process is that there's no process. There's no point of view, if you will. I mean, I think that's what it's called these days. There's no point of view. Like if your CRM is your company's software. You need to make it yours. Yep. And you need to have a point of view for it. And that point of view brings a level of no point of view, then you're making the user think all the time. So if there's no constraints, you're asking people to think too much. And that's when CRM becomes a lift. It becomes a burden, not a driver. So I think you've got to balance. That's kind of my Goldilocks inference is I think if you're too restrictive, then there's no point using it. But if you're not restricted enough, there's no clarity in how to use it.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. I hadn't thought about that.
That's why I'm here, Jess, is I bring in unique points of view.
I want to unpack data of record versus data of use. But one thing that I actually found interesting as I was kind of doing some research around this is that, I mean, you hit on adoption, utilization, negative friction is obviously clear if it's too restrictive. The one thing that came up that I hadn't thought about before was the psychological impact on your users, which I don't think we think about, which would affect utilization, which is like, if you're restrictive, you're reducing trust, your users feel micromanaged, which I will say, as somebody who works with sales and service reps, like they don't like to be micromanaged usually. That just causes frustration for them. And then they lose confidence in the organization, actually, by having that restriction.
Well, one of the things that like the way CRM and other systems initially got used was it got used to micromanage, or to replace management, hence a restrictive element. And what happens is agency gets taken away. We haven't talked about this in a long time, but agency is an imperative, right? I need to feel like I'm in control.
Yeah.
Which is where we get to the diciest place of lockdown, and that's around reporting. We'll save that for later, but that's where I argue with myself all the time about how much freedom should be provided on reporting.
Yep. So can you talk a little bit about data of record versus data of use? I know we've talked about, I can't remember if we've talked about it on the show, honestly.
So I think we've talked in the past about systems of record, systems of use.
Mm-hmm.
The perfect example I'll give is you've got multiple sales teams that have overlap on their customer base. So one of the things that we're fans of is in the configuration of your data structure, you've got your company object or your company table or whatever, however your I guess it would be an object or a table. I was trying to be a bit of a smart ass, but it's an object or a table, right? So you've got your company record. And the difficulty with the company record is if I've got multiple teams that have overlap, that company record can get really, really noisy. And you're either building duplicate properties, because by the way, last action, think of something as simple as last action.
Yep.
Well, there's your last action. There's my last action. Think about something as simple as preference. There's preferences for what you're selling. There's preferences for what I'm selling. So we're either building out duplicative properties that get used sometimes, don't get used other times, right? And if you do that, the object gets really, really heavy, gets really, really hard to manage. So what we're fans of is building out something akin to an account object or an account table. And so the account becomes salesperson specific. So the rep has two records that they're able to manage that's specific to them, right? The account record and the deal record. And that allows, so we build flexibility in the account record and deal record, and we limit the flexibility in the company record and the contact record, because the company record and the contact record, that's an object, that's data of record, right? And so we're freeing up for your data of use.
All right. So we talked about kind of too much restriction. What happens if you loosen that, you don't have enough? Like you just let users edit whatever. That's
anarchy. Again, constraint unlocks productivity. Constraint unlocks velocity. So if everything is open, then I was joking, I jokingly referred to anarchy, but that's what you get. You get a lot of inconsistent use. You get different versions of the truth, different levels of, there's clearly a need to define what is the level of record that you need.
Yep.
I think there's a tendency to overshoot it. Another example of being too restrictive is here's the 76 things that you need to fill in, right? And in the situation that I'm in, 3 of these things matter, right?
Yep.
That's an example of friction. So I think when it's too loose, just like if it's too tight, you generate too much friction because I can't do things, or to do something is harder than it should be. You get the same effect. So it's kind of like if you think about friction being I always forget which axis this is. I'm dyslexic, but if your vertical axis is friction,
yep,
and your horizontal axis is restriction,
yeah,
the friction is a U. So high friction. So you go high friction, the friction lowers, and then it starts to go back up, right? And so too little restriction creates the same, correlates to the same level of friction that too much restriction has. The battle cry is don't make me think. And so too little restriction makes the user think too much. And that's the biggest issue with overly simplified implementations.
Yeah.
Right? All we need is And so you don't build in real configuration. You're not building in what that system point of view is. And so every time I go to it, I have to think about it. And it might not be a big think, but little thinks add up really, really fast, especially when you're talking about sales reps. The other thing that you lose is you lose a lot of opportunity for automation. So,
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Here's an example. Take closed lost. No restriction is closed lost is an open field. There's a non-required open field.
Right. Non-required open.
Now, by the way, early on, company starts off, they're on their first CRM. They've got 1, 2, 3 salespeople. That might be okay.
Yeah.
You don't know enough yet to start locking it down. Too restrictive is it's a required property and you have 3 options.
Yep.
And by the way, think about this. Let's say you have 5 options. Overly restrictive and it's required. What will a rep do? A rep will begin to pick the lowest hanging fruit reason. And now you've got data. You've got the thing that's worse than not having data. You have the data, but you can't trust the data.
Yeah, which one of the things that came up as I was looking at dangers was, and we're seeing this as we work with larger organizations, is there are potential legal consequences to not having restriction and clear direction. Like I worked for a credit repair company in a previous life, ran the research team, and we had to have audit logs of everything that we did, and the notes had to be, and if those things were in multiple places and we got audited, we'd be screwed. And so I think that's a piece where IT is definitely aware of that and thinking about that, but I don't know if they come in and it's perceived as, okay, well, we're the no police because of that. I do think it's a conversation you've got to have within your org of, to your point, where is that data stored? Where's the consistency? So if you do have that kind of business, that kind of impact, that you know where to get it.
The thing that's interesting is how rarely those compliance elements, and I worked in as compliant, as compliant focused an industry as you can work in, right? How often that compliance element isn't baked into the business process. So it becomes overly restrictive. It becomes, oh, that's an IT issue. And, how many times sales isn't even aware that there's a compliance element or something like that. And so, really building that in and baking that in, and making, like sometimes it's a great idea to just make it a drop down and give somebody, 5 options to choose from with certain elements requiring an additional explanation of some form. But it, the challenge is, if you want to unlock the productivity of the user, these are the things that you have to think about in advance. And you also, when we talk about levels of complete, like you can't come in on the first level of complete and have everything in place locked down. You got to be really focused on, okay, what are the foundational elements? What are the places that we really want to lock in, lock down? And that means that there is going to be some friction, right? But some of that friction is driving learning so that you can build the system that stands up. Otherwise, you come in and you create a lot of tech debt. You go in and 6 months later, 6 years later, you've built this dysfunctional thing that's functioning. And then, the cost of managing it is too high. Now you want to come in and fix it. And it's this huge, huge undertaking. We're actually dealing with this with with a prospect. They've got just tremendous tech debt in their processes. And I'm looking at it and it's like, God, is it worth dealing with?
Yeah.
But the reason that it is worth dealing with is the thing about tech debt is tech debt never gets smaller.
Right.
It's only going to become a bigger problem that's going to have a bigger impact, et cetera. So.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there is a way to build this into the process and your training of users on the CRM. And that's why it's important to talk about this stuff early. So you can see, where do we build this in where, the screen pop comes up, or I select this and then I get that, and those are required. I think making sure you build that as much into the workflow, and I'm not talking about HubSpot automation workflows, I'm talking about the user workflow, is important, because there's a way to get that restriction, that compliance, without the user even knowing that it's there.
Yeah, there is, and I would say, you know, when you do things like screen pops and stuff like that, be careful, because that's a form of friction as well.
Yep.
And really think about the timing of that and the necessity of that. There's an element of, you know, one of the things I'm a fan of is exception reporting.
Yep.
I think one of the lost skills in sales is profiling your customer and profiling your deal. As you build that, and like, so that's a skill to train and teach. It's a learning and development piece as you're building that and building the CRM so that you can have that profile. There's times to do that. So I see a lot of times people bring in restricted. Well, you know that as a general rule, I'm not a fan of the best required property is the one that's not required. You know, you do need some required properties at certain times, but really being clear on timing that. And by the way, one of the reasons that properties don't get filled out is because the training wasn't effective or the training wasn't ongoing. So making it easy to access that, making it easy to get a picture. I know for me, I always find like when I'm having to clean things up, there's always a cleanup element. I'll tend to group that together. If I have to fill in some detailed explanation in the moment, I'm as likely just not to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't have time to fill that out. And so there's no record of it.
Yeah.
And ultimately when there is any type of record of it, it comes late.
So I want to talk about the impact on reporting. You brought this up earlier. How do you balance this and make sure that you have accurate reporting and make sure you can forecast what you need without causing the friction on the users that we've talked about?
Tell me more what you're getting at, because there's like about 100 different directions. It's not restrictive enough, Jess. Your question doesn't restrict my thought.
Let me rephrase the question. So you said you frequently like argue with yourself about how to balance restriction but still get accurate reporting. What is that dilemma that you have?
As CRMs became more prevalent and reporting became a core element of CRM, one of the common refrains that you would hear is the democratization of data, the democratization of reporting. Everybody can create their own report. Everyone can get what they want. And, you know, when you initially hear that, it's a pretty exciting thing, right? I know I hate, like if I would have to go to somebody to say, look, I need a report to do X, Y, or Z, I'd get pretty frustrated with that pretty quickly.
Yep.
Right. But the difficulty is, having looked at any CRM with more than 10 users, the number of reports, the number of dashboards, the number of different views, the duplicity, and the challenge with a lot of the duplicity is it's not even 100% duplicative, it's 90% duplicative.
Yep.
So suddenly everyone thinks they're looking at the same thing, but they're not looking at the same thing. So I think that there's an element of, you know, so I fight with myself all the time. I say, you know what, only your reporting team should be allowed to create reports. Now, one thing comes into, well, what is a report? Because different CRM, right, do that differently. And then I'm like, well, no, they, you know, look, I know salespeople. Salespeople want to break down and look at their territory and what's going on. You know, different people. I mean, some people do some of the craziest things that I've seen, right? Yeah. And they're going to do it one way or the other, right? The advantage of doing it in the CRM is there's a record of it. If you don't let them do it in the CRM, they're going to do it on their own. There's no record of it.
Yeah.
That's your hidden tech stack. That's your shadow stack. Which is a growing problem. And by the way, if you think about data security, it's a major issue. So finding that balance is a challenge. I think where I've come, where I've kind of settled, is having certain structures be your reports of record, and then allowing, like, I almost think of it as allowing playgrounds. So you can play with whatever you want to play with over here. But as far as what is the truth at this place, what matters, what we're looking at. These are, and I've been doing some digging into information reporting design, et cetera. I like to think of it as continuing education, Jess. And the biggest mistake, the hardest thing to do with a dashboard, is to limit what you're looking at. We talked about that in the dashboard episode.
Yeah.
And so, like you have a major network effect problem with reporting in a non-restricted CRM. Each person, you're increasing the chaos of what's being tracked exponentially more than you are arithmetically.
Mm-hmm. I want to go somewhere that's kind of reporting adjacent, which is a topic that I think you and I go back and forth on frequently. I argue with IT about frequently, which is the need to export data out of the system, which is usually because you need to massage the data in a way that you can't necessarily in a report in the CRM. So you want to pull it into a spreadsheet to be able to. So I want to get your take on exporting, and specifically who should be allowed to pull information out of the CRM, and why do you need the ability to export? Because I think you fall on the side of not necessarily for everybody, but allowing that capability.
No, actually, I think I'm probably the opposite.
Okay.
I think I should be allowed to export.
Right. Let me rephrase. You think you should have carte blanche to export, no one else should?
I should be allowed to export. My first question is, what do you need to export for? Especially with top tier CRM, if it's something that you really need, how do we build that into the CRM? And by the way, I want you working off of, the National's Advanced Analytics Department puts reports together that people look at. And that's what, if you're a national, that's the data that you use.
Yep.
That's my first question. There's a data security issue, which I think is why IT is focused on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's an element of, a company needs a value proposition to build a sales organization. And by the way, I don't mean just a value proposition for their customer. They need a value proposition for the salesperson. Too often, the only experience somebody has with a company is their salesperson. That is a problem. One of the reasons that good CRM utilization is so important is if you're not utilizing CRM every night, your data goes to sleep and you're counting on the fact that it wakes up and comes back to you the next day. So there's definitely an element of locking that down. I think that there are reasons to export. Mm-hmm. There are aspects where you need to manipulate some data sometimes for certain things, but this goes back into, if I'm allowing everyone to export, and this I may have been on the export side, on team export before.
Yeah.
But if you've got your spreadsheet and I've got my spreadsheet and somebody else has their spreadsheet, that means that we're not working in alignment. So I think that it's more, what is your job? We've got a team we should have a team that's responsible for putting together for configuring insights. If you're a salesperson and you're putting reports together, do you know what you're not doing?
Selling.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like, well,
but it keeps them so busy, Doug.
And so, by the way, what is it that you need? Because if you actually really need it, maybe other people need it too.
Well, so this prompted a question for me. So if you're finding that you're having to export to manipulate data or get the report you need because you need to export it into a spreadsheet, is that a sign that you need to reevaluate your process, your configuration, how you're using the CRM?
It's a sign that you need to evaluate your CRM, your process, your configuration. I mean, I remember that. I mean, if you go back, you've been here, 8 years?
Yeah, almost 9.
Almost 9, yeah.
Almost 9.
If you go back 5, 6, 7 years ago, I mean, if you go back 7, 8 years ago, we used to export things very often. If you go back 4 or 5 years ago, we used to export things occasionally.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about our CRM.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I did.
I haven't done an export from our CRM in like 3 years.
Yeah. So we're able to manage those things within and better to build within. Yeah. One of the things that, I mean, we're going through the challenge right now of cleaning up our CRM. I'm still getting dashboards emailed to me that we haven't looked at in 6 years.
I've filtered those emails. I'm probably getting them too. I'm just not getting them in my inbox.
And that goes into, subtraction is hard. So that's also where I think, bloat gets real. I mean, how many dashboards do we have, Jess? Probably, we're better than most, but we probably have about 25, 26 dashboards.
Yeah. And I pay attention to 3.
Yeah. I probably pay attention to 3 to 5.
I was going to say you pay attention to a couple more because of the sales aspect of what you do. But there are 3 dashboards that I look at. And funnily enough, and I know we're a little bit off track on dashboards, but I actually look at those in the CRM more than when they were emailed to me, which is just an interesting thing. So I want to unpack some steps around the right approach. So we talked about data of use versus data of record. The other thing I think you need, and we hit on parts of this, you need clearly defined user stories. Like you need to be clear on what should the user be doing, and that's going to dictate
stories. Like that needs to be a core part of your L&D.
Yep. Yes. So when we train, we share user stories at the beginning of training of what we're covering.
And you know what we should be doing more of? Resharing those stories. So we use user stories to launch.
Yeah.
We need to be like, those user stories need to be prevalent. I actually think that that you've got your user stories are in the right place when your users speak in user stories.
So I agree with you on the training. I agree with you on the users speaking in user story aspect. The other piece I think that we need to get better at, and RevOps needs to get better at, is referencing those user stories when we're talking about, not in a training aspect, but like why we're doing something. So we actually have a client who has some pretty stringent restrictions on what data is accessible to what users, and the system is built for that. It shows users what they should be seeing and what they shouldn't. Their contact information is very, like, we have to be careful with the contact data. And I know one thing that I frequently do when I'm talking to them, because they're like, okay, well, why was this set up this way? Okay, well, remember the users have to do this, and then they have to do that, and then they have to do the other thing. Like, RevOps should also be using those user stories when they're talking to the team about configuration, what's been set up and why. And I don't think that happens. I think we fall off on that, and it becomes well, that's just the way we set it up. That's just the way it is. And then we deviate from that when we're not talking and anchoring in the user story.
Well, and the reason that business process is so important is that your business process isn't static. Things are constantly changing and shifting. And so if you don't have that mapped, before you know it, you're now changing things because it makes sense to change them, but you've lost that documentation. And so you start building workarounds to workarounds to workarounds because you're just solving symptoms.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that also comes into, I think that, this is something that maybe we do in more advanced situations for us, but statements of purpose. What is the role of the CRM for each role in the organization? Because the CRM utilization, like the purpose of the CRM, is very much driven by what the user's role is and what the broader context,
Yep.
CRM means one thing to finance. It means something completely different to sales.
Yep. Which actually brings me nicely to my next point, which is and this is the hardest thing, I think, when we're dealing with larger organizations and complex organizations, clearly defining your users. What teams are they on? What roles do they have? What do they need access to? And what are they doing in the CRM? Because that's, with a larger group, you could have 10, 15 different roles in the CRM, and they all might need access to different data. So
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think the most important element of all those is, I think you need, and it's probably also the least done, is clearly defining what are the roles. I'd rather not have teams defined than not have clear roles defined. And when I say clear roles, I don't mean permissions.
No, I know. I agree with what you're saying.
These are the different types of users. This is what they're doing. This is the job of the CRM. That is
We're actually in the process of doing this with a client that we've had for a couple of years that, look, we got them in there, we got them launched, and now it's like we're having a real conversation of, okay, well, what do these different people do? What does a sales manager do versus a sales rep? What does a service person do? What is an ops person who's in the CRM doing? And then you define that first. And I think that's actually where we get off track on this. We talk in deep dives about you need to forget about the CRM. I think when we talk about people using the CRM and we get bogged down in permission sets, we're looking at, okay, what are the permission sets in HubSpot and Salesforce and whatever, and we're aligning to that versus really saying, okay, what are they doing though day to day? What is their actual role?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the approach that needs to get taken. And then you align the system to that. You don't align your users to the system.
Mm-hmm. We've got that going on right now with a whole set that's leading to, they want to get a viewpoint on their customer, but their customer, to their growth team, customer means one thing. To their success team, customer means something else. And if we're not accounting for that whole picture, but the funny thing is, sales is easy. Customer management is hard, right? And I'm not saying that sales is easy, right? Configuring for sales, but it's also, this is the thing that people aren't going to like about this, because I'm sure what's going through people's head on listening to it is like, okay, yeah, I get it. We need to find the right path of level of, how restrictive, what level of point of view do we bring to it? How do we find that? How do we get to the right place? And the reality is it's going to be triangulation. You're going to get too restrictive in an area. You're going to be not restrictive enough. I think your goal should be, and this is why a RevOps team is so important. Your goal should be getting to the point of being restrictive enough, but not quite there.
Yep. I agree.
Right. And look, it's software. It is software, right? This is the soft part of the ware. The algorithm is that's the relatively easy part. This is art. This is about understanding the totality, realizing what the context is. And by the way, the other two elements on this, too often we look at it as we look to the CRM, and we do things like the CRM's not working, right? The two other elements are management.
Yep.
Right. When we use CRM to replace what management should be doing, that's my problem of, well, we manage by the numbers here. Yep. I'm like, really? You manage by the numbers? You have numbers that work for you? Because I'd love to manage by the numbers, but I've got people. So I manage by the people. Right? We got to manage people. Yep. Right. And here's the thing. This is the truth. People do need to be managed.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. In an organization, people do need to be managed. I don't like to admit it, but it is true. Right. And then the second element is learning and development. The number of times what we're looking at is, it's a configuration problem. So it's a product problem. Mm-hmm. It's a knowledge problem. It's a systems problem.
Yep.
Right. Systems problem is your management and business process design. Those three things need to work in tandem. The thing is, it's not easy, but the payout is great.
I liked what you said about triangulation, because it brings me to my last point, which I think is actually the most important aspect of this, and the step that probably gets skipped more than anything, which is, this is something that needs to get regularly reviewed. So the client that I'm talking about, the reason we're going through that process, that we've had users in, they've got roles, they've got permission sets assigned. We're re-looking at it because we've determined we need to, because we did a review. So you need to be looking at this stuff on a regular basis.
By the way, well, and the role changes.
Correct. Yes.
I want to be clear. You need to define those roles as part of your business process, whether you have a CRM or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
The fact is, you need to extend it to your CRM, but I'm not talking about defining your roles for purposes of the CRM. It's like being a football team and not defining here's what the left tackle is responsible for. Here's what the right tackle, right. You're defining what those roles are from broad down into detail, what your point of view of those positions are. Right. So, you show me a performer, go to an orchestra. What's first chair responsible for? What's second chair? So you've got your violinists, But then you got your first chair, your second chair, your third chair. All of those roles are clearly defined.
Yep.
Right? That's what enables them to perform in unison. That's what enables magic to happen, as opposed to it sounding like second grade orchestra performance.
Yep. And that's going to change as your company grows. Like we've had the benefit of having clients for as long as 7-8 years. And we've seen how that changes everything from data hierarchy to those user roles to access rules and compliance requirements. Mm-hmm. So we've had companies who get purchased by a larger organization, and they now have a whole new level of compliance they need to meet that was not there 4 years ago. And I think your point on the example you brought up around close lost, and hey, we're going to start that as a fill-in field because we're not ready yet. But we've been using the CRM now for 2 years. Now we need a clear process there for our users because we've got a massive data there. Like that's the stuff that this needs to be part of your regular review of your CRM, and you need to have all your stakeholders involved in the conversation.
It is always changing if you're not actively managing this, if you're not staying in front of it. And again, this is why you've got to be thinking 18 to 24 months ahead and working in an agile perspective so that you can adjust as your priorities adjust. Because by the way, you're not only are you going to change and your organization is going to change, the nature of your market's going to change. Who you're competing with is going to change. The level of competition that you're dealing with is going to change. You're going to get larger. Things are going to get more nuanced. You're going to get thrown back. You need to, adjust. This is not a passive sport. This is very much of an active engagement.
Yep.
I saw somebody say that RevOps is dead. I thought that was fascinating. Like, wow, we're already at the clickbait of RevOps is dead. RevOps is not dead. That's when RevOps is beginning. Like that's my hope that RevOps is actually going to get more real, is that it's now, it's no longer the buzzword that it used to be, or it's becoming less of the buzzword.
All right. I got a couple of takeaways. Make sure you're balancing data of record versus data of use, and you've got a plan in place there. Too much restriction has the danger of removing agency, which means you're not going to get utilization from your users. I know you brought it up as a joke, but remember Goldilocks needs to be just right. Work in levels of complete, and then make sure that you have a regular review cycle for these things. That's key.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, because restrictive and lockdown, Jess, I know you're the doomser, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
It's got a negative connotation to it.
Oh, I know. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think don't refer to it as that. Talk about it as, what is your company's CRM point of view?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Right. And I'll tell you this, I think that the failure to have a clear point of view is worse than having a point of view that's wrong. Because if your point of view is wrong, and by the way, someone's going to ask, I know this, well, how do I know if I have the right point of view? Here's how you know you have the right point of view. Is it working? And if your point of view isn't working, then make an adjustment to your point of view. It's all part of that hypothesis-driven growth, et cetera. And I'll tell you, as you bring and adjust, because by the way, even if your point of view is right, if you don't continue to adjust it, it's only a matter of time till it's not right.
Yep.
Right? Bring an ongoing point of view to managing your CRM. You'll be saying no to shitty RevOps.
Till next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of The RevOps Show. Don't forget to follow us on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Come over and join the RevOps Show fam. All links are in the show notes for you, and if you have any inquiries about the show or have any questions you want Doug and Jess to answer, feel free to email me at hannah@liftenablement.com. When it comes down to CRM lockdown, it's all about balance. Just like Goldilocks, you don't want it too open or too restricted, but just right. There's no one-size-fits-all to getting your CRM in the place that it needs to be for your users. It should be shaped by your unique business processes. Thanks again for listening to the episode, and until next time, just say no to shitty RevOps.